Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. I'm back from my extended vacation. I know folks out there have not heard from me in a while, a couple of weeks, but I'm back on the planet. I never left the planet, but I'm back, and we're here to interview a fascinating subject. Before we get started, though, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday evening. In there, I do a mundane overview of the planetary activity for the week to come that impacts all of us, as you well know. And then I also break it out into individual signs. I encourage you to read your sun sign as well as your rising sign. If you don't know your rising sign, that is based on the time of birth, not necessarily the day. It's more based on the exact time that you were born. And I encourage you to get that. You can find it on your birth certificate or ask your mother. She was there, I'm pretty sure. So that's an interesting place to start. And once you have those two pieces of information, you'll get a far more accurate and far more granular description of what's going to be happening in your life to come. Because if you put the two of those together, the sun sign and the rising sign, whatever they may be, you'll get a composite reading for the week to come, and you'll find that it is incredibly accurate. So I encourage you to do that. One of the things I do, I subscribe to a service called the Astrology News Service, which allows me to be in touch with a lot of interesting astrologers, and I like to hear what people are saying. And I came across one that I thought the title caught my eye. It was really fascinating because I get the same question a lot. And the question was, do you believe in astrology? And it's written by Alexandra Caracosta, who is my guest today. Her website is wisdomastrology.com, and she's an astrologer from the West Coast. And I thought, I've heard this question before, and I think it'd be a great topic for a podcast. So here we are. And welcome to the show, Alexandra. It's great to have you on today.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting that people think of, it's funny how people sort of, phrase or frame what astrology is as if it's some sort of a belief system or religious affiliation of some sort. And it really is neither. And I'm always intrigued by that. I mean, and your sort of response to it is a nice way of sort of setting the stage. I'm curious if you could just sort of give us an overview of what that's all about in your view.
Well, Chris, yes, we all get that question. Do you believe in astrology? And yeah, it's not a belief. It's an symbolic archetypal language that we use to try to understand the world outside of us and within us, because everything's a reflection of everything else. And in astrology, just like in nature, and I mean, basically, astrology is a study of how nature works in many ways. It's by observation, but also astrology is all about cycles. And there's a beginning to a cycle, a middle, and an end. And there are many different cycles vibrating in our lives, as there are in nature all the time. So as an astrologer, it's just a matter of being able to identify what some of those cycles are so you can just discuss them. It's not any sort of like really deep mystery.
No, it's not. And I think the being advised of what is happening with regard to the cycles, especially if you know your own particulars of your chart and how it may be impacting, I think it's remarkably important with regard to timing events. I think that there's a time to hold and a time to fold, using that old gambler's adage. And I think that by being informed, we can save ourselves a lot of trouble and actually have a far greater chance of succeeding if we are in the right time and place. I find that to be very often the case.
Without a doubt. I mean, a lot of times, in life, we have found ourselves, pushing when we should be just like letting go, or trying to initiate activities which just don't seem to go anywhere. It's really nice to kind of know where we're at, so we can make better informed and wiser decisions. Having said that, also, you know, I'm not of the inclination that things happen to us, and that in astrology we're going to be able to forecast that, you know, tomorrow we're going to make $1 million, or we're going to get hit by a car, or these externalized events. Though what usually happens, if we're aware of our own inner, of what's going on for us, is that, you know, we create space in our life for certain things to happen, and then we imagine, we think that they're just happening to us, when actually we're sort of creating them.
We are, and we.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and of course it does. Yeah, I totally understand it, because I've wrestled with this myself, and people do ask me the same question: do you believe? And I say it's not really something that you believe in. You don't really. It's whether you subscribe to it as a thought process is probably more how I would describe it. I've always thought of it as a science and an art form. I think the scientific piece is fairly evident when we look at the degrees and the angles and the architectural geometric shapes that we are formed by our patterns and our charts, and then the art of it really comes from how you interpret that and how best to manifest that, because many people, I think, oftentimes I get clients saying, oh my gosh, why am I going through such a hard time? And typically a person will come to see an astrologer when they're going through a hard time.
Right.
And, you know, they're always asking, why are these things happening to me, as if there's some sort of overarching sort of command power that's, you know, infusing them with this thing. And it's not really that. It's just about that they're in a cycle and a place and time where things may not be as easy as they could be. But there's also the option that is going to be changing. The option is there that the time is changing, and these things do pass. I always use the analogy of a cuckoo clock when I'm referring to people, because a cuckoo clock, or any clock for that matter, is a variety of multiple sized little gears that are all different sizes going at different revolutions, and then when they all click and at the right spot and time, the cuckoo comes out and the person arrives. And we see that reflected many times through our lives when we have, you know, auspicious events or even things that are not pleasant.
Well, and in fact, you know, the cuckoo clock really brings to mind also, you know, the Antikythera machine, which was discovered off one of the islands off of Greece. That was actually an astronomical, very accurate instrument, but they used it also for determining weather patterns. I mean, this is from like 3,000 years ago.
Right. Well, you know, there's a certain logic to all this. It just makes perfect sense. When you stop and think about, when people have doubts about this thing, I always refer to them, you know, one of the easiest ways to sort of settle the argument, if there's any way to settle this argument, is, you know, I say, well, look at the moon. The moon obviously affects the tides. We see that. The other example I always use is when an eclipse happens. How can a planet, an orb such as the moon, 250,000 miles away from us, completely cover another orb 93 million miles away? I mean, that in itself just shows that there is a symmetry, a divine sort of logic that underlies all this, that sort of accounts for the cycles that we see.
Well, absolutely, and I use that also, the similar analogy of, like, just look at the sun and the moon in our lives. We can't dismiss the effect that they have on us, and they're just other pieces that are just closer to us and much, you know, and larger than the rest of the planets. But, you know, there's all kinds of stuff out there. It's just a matter of what it is that we choose to really, you know, pay attention to.
Right.
But they all have an influence on us. How could they not?
Exactly. And because exactly. It's impossible for them not to have an impact on us. And because time is a continuum, you know, time is this perpetual rotating sort of, like, you know, corkscrew, gigantic helios going through the time. We are on that same pattern, just like being on a stream and a boat. You're always moving in some direction. You're not going to go back up that way. And so, by embracing this, I think that we sort of relive these cycles over and over again. It's just that we're down the road further, and of course progress has happened in between. So what happened to somebody 100 years ago may be very similar to what is happening to us, to a person today. It's just that the context is different. It's
exactly. Shifted. Yep, precisely. And also, I think it's good to remember, you know, that, or good to know. I mean, we all have, you know, we all come from a family pattern, a family system. You know, whether we're a human, whether we're an apple tree, whatever, our DNA will be similar to our family pattern.
Right.
Okay? And it's by understanding our family patterns, too. And because when we do horoscopes of generations of people, you will see that very similar themes continue to arise.
Yes.
They're just spoken slightly differently.
Yeah, they're spoken differently because they're in a different place and time, and you know the setting changes, but the time and the cycle and the pattern recurs. And obviously, we're going to be seeing patterns coming up that we haven't seen yet, especially when we look at Pluto and some of the outer planets. We haven't really witnessed what a Pluto return is yet, because none of us live long enough to see that. But as a country, we will be witnessing it, and it seems as if we really are witnessing it as we go forward. I mean, we are sort of seeing the influence of Pluto on the United States, if you think of it that way.
Well, I think we're seeing that's, it's Pluto and Uranus and everything else that's been going on here. But the influence of Pluto, I think, is really significant because it's, with Plutonian energy, nothing really happens usually suddenly. It's kind of a slow process which all of a sudden starts to become manifest. But it's been in action for a long time. So when we're looking at, Pluto in Capricorn, when we're looking at structures and sustainability, it's like a lot of these things that we're faced with today, here in our country and in the Western world for sure, is that we have, and maybe far beyond that, is that we have some structures that are unsustainable. And Pluto is not going to back off. I mean, Pluto is the god of death and rebirth, transformation, transcendence, right?
Right, and I think we are in the process of that now. I think all great empires go through this cycle. If you look at it historically, they are always there's the rise and the fall of any great empire. If we look of ourselves as a world empire of sorts, which I guess we can clearly say is true, we are coming up against our day of our time, and it seems as if we are going, and that's not just a bad thing. We are sort of going to be reconstructed perhaps in a new manner, which may be more in line with our true purpose and destiny. And it's kind of like the swinging of the pendulum. We live in a dualistic world, and we're going to have that sort of dichotomy of events and characteristics in our lives and events that swing from one side to the other, which gives us that sense of, ultimately gives us a sense of balance.
Right. Because I'm a strong believer also that, sometimes in life things are more challenging than other times, right? Yeah. And whether it's in a personal level or in a communal, collective level, right? Right. But necessity is the mother of invention. Right. This is how we get to grow, is through the difficulties. We grow at the rate of pain. Yes. Personally and collectively.
Absolutely. I always say that if the roof did not leak, we would not fix it. And so when the roof leaks in our society or in our lives, it prods us to move forward. I listen to a lot of talk radio, and I was listening to someone the other day talking about the climate accord, the Paris Climate Accord, and the fact that we're not going in there. And many people are coming down, even though they're upset about it, they're saying, well, this might be a major wake-up call for us to step up our game and push even harder. So in many ways, what seems to be a negative event could actually turn out to be very positive as people turn towards, with a renewed interest in trying to get something solved in a much more fruitful manner. And this might be the impetus we need.
I think that's what's currently happening in our country here in this,
I do too, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. Listen, it's a good thing because it has really motivated a lot of us to get more active.
Exactly. And that's the one thing that's a great thing, because without it, we became apathetic. We were becoming...
I mean, if we had gone the other way, it would have been just more of the same. If nothing, change takes time, but there's a lot of unexpected events, it seems like, all the time with our new administration.
Of course.
That are really kind of catching our attention. And I don't know about you, but I hear people, talk about, well, it's them. It's they're doing this or he's doing that or she's doing that. It's not. It's us. And especially when we're looking at the bigger picture, we are a part of it. So if we want to see change, we all have to be a part of it.
That's true.
What are we willing to live with and without?
And this is getting back to our subject, which is why astrology serves as a viable guide, because it does provide, it almost provides a running storyline of the logic of the way things happen. We can see when we had this amazing Saturn Neptune square that was going through all during the political cycle, which I always thought was this sort of this, which was classic in my view, because it had all the, and especially the Neptunian quality, had all the characteristics of this man emerging on a stage in a bank of fog. I mean, what could be more Neptunian than when Trump walked out into the Republican National Convention in this array of fog? That was perfect, and the fact that he's a reality TV star speaks to the whole disillusion, illusion piece, and so we've been living through this, and this provides sort of the context and the logic for explaining why we are where we are. I think it has that real underpinning to it.
But I think also with this Neptune-Saturn piece that you were just talking about, and now we've moved away from it for now, but it has really brought up this issue of homelessness as well.
Yes.
Because I also think, with what Neptune wants in a very deep way, I think, is to go home to that which connects us to the divine. How do we connect to the divine? How can we be connected to a place that we can call home and feel safe? And especially as Neptune has gone back to its place of where it's quite comfortable in Pisces.
Right.
And then with the squares of Saturn, we've just seen such a huge uprising of homelessness all across the globe.
Right.
And I think it's going to be a journey, especially while Neptune is in Pisces, to try to find what that home is.
Yeah, I think there's a search for home, and there's a search for stability, and there's so much that we have to have, I think, these jarring kinds of events and people in our lives in order to move us, because I think that we would become too complacent otherwise. So the homelessness is an issue. There's quite a few issues, I know. And I think that we are trying to find our way through that, and it is through I think that in some ways, even though the social media quality that we are all immersed in has its downside to it, it also is a way of building a community which brings these points to the surface in a very more personal way. So we're having a conversation unlike we've ever had in the past, which I think is good, because it does, I think, under all of it, build community at some place and some level. And that, you could also argue that it distracts from community because people are spending too much time on their phones and they're not actually out engaging with people face to face. But I think that is also, there's a good and bad in that mix somewhere.
I agree. I have mixed feelings about it all. But,
yeah, I do too.
But it's something that is part of our culture. Right. So me liking it or not liking it isn't going to change things. But there's a place for everything, right? So it's nothing in excess too.
Right, all things in moderation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But getting back to our topic about believing in astrology, there's this I think a big misconception that people see it sort of as something that you have to believe in. I've heard people say such bizarre things to me, and I'm sure you have over the course of your life too. Like, well, do planets emit electrical waves that are forcing us to do certain things? And you hear an awful lot of this odd sort of rhetoric regarding what people believe astrology to be, when really it is simply an observation of the motion and of time and the cycles of events that recur when certain things are the same. This is when we find these things happening, we can see, and I think one of the best things to do is to sort of, I've done this in the past, I've kept what I call a lunar diary or an astrology diary, and I will at certain points in time, so I'll write down all the planets and the aspects and where they are, and then I'll write down how I'm feeling at the time and see if they map to where they are with regard to my individual life. And you can do that with the moon very easily, because you'll go through any course of a month or a day or anything where your mood changes are going to be much different based on the placement of the moon in accordance with your own personal chart.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, yes, yes, for sure. And also, I mean, we can get. I mean, I've watched some astrologers, some friends, some colleagues. I mean, you can get pretty ridiculous about trying to map everything out. These are my words, partly because, you know, there's so much going on in our life. We're not going to be aware of every little thing all the time, but we have to know where the broader strokes of our life are taking us, what we need to be paying attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's the outer planets that provide more of that kind of long look. I think Mars, Jupiter, Saturn are the ones that I spend most of my time looking at. And no, I mean, it's good to know the other planets as well, but I think that they are the ones that sort of provide the greatest sense of context for, you know, sort of, like you say, the long-term planning is very important. I think, you know, if you're going to be trying to decide what to do, whether to buy a house, whether to have a baby, whether to get married,
right.
Those things, all those big life choices are very valuable. And I've always thought that it would be a wonderful career guidance tool for high schools to help kids decide what they wanted to do. Where are their strengths?
You know, actually, I do quite a bit of that in Greece, and it's you know, at least to help out. You know, to kind of you know, talk about what their interests are, what their aptitudes are, what's realistic. You know, it's the conversation. It's so important.
It's a very important conversation. Yeah,
it's a very important conversation. But like yesterday, in the last couple of days, we had Mars move into Cancer, right?
Right.
So I think that's going to, you know, for the next couple of months anyway. I think while Mars is in Cancer, I think we need to. All of us, you know, and certainly depending on where it falls in our own horoscope, but be a little extra mindful about our aggression. Are we holding our feelings in, or are we letting them out? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes with Mars in Cancer, there's a tendency to hold on to feelings.
Right. And of course, then the other question is, how do we express those feelings when they do come out? Do we act out in an outrageous fashion,
right.
and we're going to have, you know, then we're also going to have Mercury stepping into Gemini, where it's right. going to be at home, and we're going to have Venus stepping into Taurus, where it's going to be at home. So those will be interesting counterbalances. Even though they are all fairly quick moving planets, they will have an impact on our lives, and depending upon where they land in your people's individual charts, there'll be great relevance there. I think. Yeah.
And the nodes, too.
Yes, the nodes.
The nodes, I've just discovered that they have a huge impact on what is going on in our life. Mm-hmm. The transiting nodes.
Yes, they do. They certainly do. And I think that they have this impact that is, even though it's sort of this unusual spot, it's a thing that I find it to be fascinating because it has such accuracy in an individual's lives. You know, when you see where they land and where you're coming to. I recently, we had mentioned earlier, I recently graduated from a program I was involved in, and the very last day of my, the last thing I had to do a dissertation for my last piece, and the nodes were exactly on my nodes that day. And that was just like, you know, it's just phenomenal. I mean, here I was the last day of this whole journey I'd been on for quite some time, and the south node was on my north node, and the north node was on my south node and on that day. And these things there's no small coincidence here. These are important. And I subconsciously set myself on this journey to land at this point in time. I don't know that. I didn't ever actively thought about it. I didn't sit down and say, on May 13th, I'm going to be prepared to do this at this point in time. I didn't have that preconceived notion because I don't want to overthink things, and I don't think it's always good to sort of load the gun that way. But I do think it helps to have an overarching idea of where you're headed, where to put your energy now, where is your energy best served. And that, I think, astrology is incredibly useful for.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what we do. This is, you know, there's obviously many, many different kinds of astrology. And, I mean, those people who are also, those astrologers who are in financial astrology, you know, there's been they've had some incredible success by tracking the macro and microeconomic cycles, right?
Mm, yes, right.
So, I mean, you can apply this craft this art in so many ways. But I mean, in ancient times they always used it, right? It wasn't until about 1700s when I think it was largely what was going on is that it was being used to determine outcomes, political outcomes, and because back then, every king, every lord, they had their astronomer, and we started meddling. And I don't believe it's our place to meddle in politics,
right?
Because we can use this for influence. But that's when things kind of went south, and astrology split from astronomy, and then the Christian Church came. Well, you know the story,
right? Yeah.
And the Christian Church, was determined to be witchcraft, and
right. And I also think there's all the question of one of the phrases I use a lot is that when we are forewarned, we are forearmed. And I think that is a useful adage or phrase because it does allow us to sort of prepare ourselves for what we can see coming. I think that we all reach a point in our lives where things are logical and we have to make decisions, and we do have free will. There's no question about it. We can decide to go left or right at any point in time. But if we have some background information that helps provide that
Mm-hmm.
also broadens our options, and I think clarifies it, at least in some ways, or at least crystallizes it.
And also it helps us gain understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself is worth so much, to really understand what's going on in our life, instead of at times wondering, why is this going on like this or like that. It's not just to manipulate the situation, but it's also to understand, like, oh, this is what's happening, and I can see that I'm going to have to deal with this particular issue in my life for X amount of time, and do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It does provide, in some ways, it provides a set of it's a guideline, or I always use the phrase of the owner's manual. The natal astrology chart
Mm-hmm.
is like an owner's manual for how to operate a person. And I think the more you know about a person, it's incredibly valuable, especially when it comes to personal relationships. My gosh, I mean, you can see in your own life or my own life, I can see relationships that worked and relationships that didn't work, and why they didn't work, and why they did, and why they did work. And I think it's fascinating to be able to understand that. So it's
and I think too, just it's interesting. It's fascinating to observe in time how, as we've made the discoveries of some of the outer planets, and we continue, to learn more about the universe all the time, it has those moments also have opened up more inner. It's expanded our inner landscape. So every discovery we make on the outside, it increases our awareness.
And I think having the ability to understand ourselves more fully is, I think, there's a real joy in that, because it's not as if, I'm supposed to do this, but it certainly explains perhaps why I have, or we all have, an affinity for certain things versus others. We see our tendencies go towards certain things. We have certain ways of approaching our lives that I think are really critical and determined by our what we see in the makeup of our astrology chart. It's really just fascinating. We're talking today with Alexandra Karakostas. Her website is Wisdom Astrology. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll be back in about 2 minutes. We're discussing the topic. We started out talking about, do you believe in astrology? As if astrology were something to believe in. And we're sort of having a nice conversation about that. And we'll be back in a few minutes. Again, Alexandra Karakostas. Her website is wisdomastrology.com. Wisdom Astrology is one long word, .com. And we'll be back in a few minutes, so hang in there. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today. Or call me
at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. As I mentioned before, my guest today is Alexandra Karakostas. She's an astrologer from the West Coast, and her website is wisdomastrology.com. I encourage you to check it out. And we're talking about the idea of whether or not we believe in astrology. Now, as an astrologers, we sort of chuckle at that phrase because we say, well, it's not really a belief system. It's more about, it's more of a navigation aid is what I would call it. It sort of helps us get through things. And we were, the idea of relationships is a very big piece of why astrology is so valuable. Because I think what it does, at its core, when you know that there is a sort of a bit of a tension between you and another person, you can look at the astrology of the individuals, if you're well versed in this. If not, you contact someone such as myself or Alexandra, and you say, this person has this characteristic, and this is the way they are, and they're not going to change that characteristic. We're not going to change our charts. We can't change how we were born. We were born with a set of DNA. We're born with fingerprints. We're born with characteristics, personality traits, and all part of a composite amalgam of our parents and our heritage and our lineage. But what it can do, by knowing that a person has a certain quality or a tendency or an affinity towards something, I think it also imbues us with a sense, ultimately, of tolerance, because it allows us to forgive sometimes. I use it this way very often. It's just the way they are. I am not going to change them. And I think that allows us to be a little more forgiving, I think, in some ways. And perhaps,
I think, and freedom, and it gives us a certain freedom off the hook. We just don't get, we can accept ourselves and others as they are.
Exactly. I think that acceptance is a very difficult thing for some people. They're always pushing that rock up the hill. And we have to. Now, that's not to say that astrology is an excuse, nor should it always be an excuse for a bad relationship. Plenty of people have bad relationships that just are not going to work. And if it's a futile struggle of pushing a rock up a hill, perhaps it's time to bail on that. And that's true for anything in life. And you don't always know what's on the other side of the door until you go through that door. And if that requires leaving a job or a relationship, then perhaps that may be the right way to go. If it isn't right, you may find that out either way as well. But it does help, I think, it helps our understanding of another person. I think that, I find that to be very much the case. You get into an argument with a partner or something like that, and you sort of say, what brought that about? And then you go look at the astrology sometimes, and you can say, oh my gosh, there it is. I mean, I've had experiences like that where I've seen this happen, like, wow, Mars was right on her ascendant, and we had a pretty good tussle. And so, I've seen stuff like this, and it does give great credence to astrology.
And I've also seen it. I mean, just recently, it came to mind again. I know I have. It's a couple. They're clients, and they just have had a very difficult relationship for the last 15 years. But unless unless they're willing to change, nothing is going to happen. I mean, make some progress, like let go of fear, because fear is an underlying thing that we can actually, in a chart, we can see where we have some fear. We can identify these patterns, these characteristics, but also to just essentially say, look, unless you're willing to do something different, nothing different will happen.
Right. And that is in itself. So when I was referring earlier to the fact that I have had people come to me, I'm sure you have too, who say, I don't like being such and such. I don't like being this sign. I don't want to be this sign. I don't like this characteristic of myself. And I always got a chuckle out of that because I said, well, you can't really change who you are. You are who you are. It's better to just sort of find a way to adapt to that, or either that or redirect that energy in a way. And I think that for every type of energy that you have, or whatever quality it is that you have, there is a counterbalance to that somewhere.
Well, always. I mean, and it's not about, we are who we are. It's like, if we're born an orange, we're never going to be a banana, right? We're exactly. Always going to be an orange. But we have the choice of becoming the best orange.
Yes, exactly. Or a different kind of orange. I mean, we have that option of, I think we do come preloaded with a certain set of, obviously, characteristics that we see in our astrology chart, but we also come through with a lot of familial baggage, too. Our parents and all that stuff is all part of who we are. It makes up our sort of our bedrock, our foundation. I often think of it as, like a computer would. You come preloaded with an operating system, and this is how you run that operating system, and that's what the astrology chart, I think, in many ways provides.
And there's and there's a lot of also being done today, some real groundbreaking work in medical astrology, and that is just proving to be very, very useful. And not that medical astrology has been around for centuries, but there's Jane Ritter Patrick. I don't know if you know of her work.
I don't know that name, no.
And anyway, she's a Scottish astrologer, and she also has been really able to understand some of the psychological origins of people's conditions and tied them in through a system that she's been working on for the last number of years. And it's fascinating at how accurate it is.
With regard to sort of tendencies that people may have, so people who are addicted personalities or such like that?
Not just that, but that also. But also, different arthritis, all kinds of ailments.
Yeah.
All kinds of ailments, because different signs, different combinations, houses and planets are associated with specific conditions.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and it's interesting in that regard. But I think that the idea of so you accept who you are, which is difficult for some people. I have had this situation with some clients who, as I had mentioned earlier, did not like who they were, and that may be more a reflection of their their role, their journey through life, and their interactions with other people in the world, more so than anything else. But I think that there is a way, even in that sort of framework, to redirect it. And I always use the example of, I'm an Aries, okay? So right off the bat, that gives you an idea of something about who I am. When I was younger, I used to get very impatient driving in my car behind people and stuff like that, and acting like in a typical Aries fashion, I would beat my horn or whatever. But as I aged and grew older and realized that was a futile effort on my part, I began to look at my impulsivity in ways that were more constructive. How can I use my impulsivity in a positive way? What can I do if I get a flash of a really good idea? What can I do that I can use to make that a better situation? And it does work. Simply by taking that same, because all events, characteristics, personality traits have potential in them. And in that potential is the ability to go one way or the other. I think that's pretty much of a black and white decision, but it's accurate in that we can decide which way to turn. And how we make that decision can be manifest in a multitude of ways that can be very positive if aimed in the right direction.
Well, like we said, it's about being informed. It's about having self-knowledge, some wisdom helps, and also about what our expectations are.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if we have, ultimately, we're responsible for ourselves. Mm-hmm. So we can't look outside of ourselves too far or too frequently to try to make our life different. We need to. Life is an inside job, and the more we know about our inside, the more likely it is we can meet with success.
I like that phrase. Life is an inside job. It really is.
It is.
That's a great phrase. I'll have to remember that one. It's funny because, and I think that, and people, spend a lot of time, as I mentioned, people rarely come to an astrologer when everything is hunky-dory, but they do come to us when times are tough or they're having a difficult decision with their lives and they're unhappy. Mm-hmm. And they try to say, when will this end, or when will it get better, and they go on these long stories. And I prefer to just not hear the stories because I like to approach the astrology chart as a clean slate. I like to look at it and say, don't tell me anything about who you are, what's going on in your life. Let me see if I can see what's going on. And then when I see what's going on, then it becomes valid. And then we can see the truth there. And it's glaringly obvious when we see that. And I think that's the beauty of the interpretation of astrology. This is where the science meets the art and the art meets the science.
Right. And there are all kinds of astrologers out there. I mean that's obvious, but also, there's consulting astrologers, there's research astrologers, there's people that just write books, right?
Yeah. And and I think the idea that when people say when the misconception of labeling astrology as a belief system, it's kind of like saying, do you believe in biology, or do you believe,
Right.
I mean, it's just, it's the same idea, right?
Well, it's the same idea as like saying, well, do you believe the sun is going to come up, or you believe the moon is going to come? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because past experience has shown us that.
Right. And in theory, as time goes on, we have more and more empirical data, and as we have more empirical data, the astrology actually becomes more accurate when we see these things beginning to form these patterns, these cycles that we refer to. And I think being enlightened and informed about those cycles can be incredibly obvious. I had a client once when I used to do terrestrial radio on the regular radio channel. I had a woman call me up and said that she had just lost her job. And she was a Taurus, and she was sitting around the house, and I said, my gosh, you got Jupiter in your 10th house right now. Why are you sitting around the house doing nothing? Get your resume updated, buy a new suit, get a new suit,
right.
get out there.
Right.
And she did, and she got a job because not having that knowledge, she didn't know when to act. And she had sort of gotten into a malaise of sort where she just got apathetic and didn't care and was sort of feeling down about herself. But sometimes knowing that external ideas that I presented to her about, wow, this is a really good time for you to be looking for work. Boom, she did it, and it worked for her.
Right. Now that happens most of the time. And also, I think people really like to know if they're going through some real difficult period of their life, kind of like some light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. Yes, that is a great
some
thing.
hope.
Yeah.
Will this ever go away, or am I going to feel differently somehow? Mm-hmm. And we can provide that as astrologers, I think. Obviously, it's not about just waving a magic wand, but it's about giving people, first of all, talking about some of these things. Being there to discuss it from different angles. Give them a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very valuable because it allows them a sense of logic, especially when you can substantiate it by taking a backward glance and saying, well, this was a difficult time for you. And they say, oh, yes, this was. How did you know that was a difficult time? We can see these patterns develop over the course of this time. And it's not as if it's something that you have to, it's not a magic power you believe in, per se. It's something that you work with, delve into, try to parse the reality out of there, see why these things are happening, and you begin to form, I think of it as a series of stories. I think astrology is rife with stories. It really is one giant story filled up with little tiny stories, and little stories are the interaction between your chart and the universe at the time. Where is Mars in your chart today? Where is the moon in your chart today? How is it reacting with you? How are you manifesting that? What's that story look like? And everybody, we have the similarities of planetary movements and interactions and alignments and transits that we see in our daily lives, and they may manifest differently for different people, but the basic theme will resonate and will continue there. That's what I think.
Right. The theme will be very much the same. The particular pattern will be similar, but how one will respond to it will vary.
Yes.
Depending on the person. But I know that in my life it certainly has been a useful tool.
Me too, for sure, absolutely.
You
you see these events, and even if you go back to before you were starting, if you go back to times in your life before you studied astrology and look at where the charts were at the times when difficult times happened to you, you can see the aspects that are there.
Oh my God, yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh sure.
Yeah.
And there was.
But it's true that we see these cycles coming and going, and it's I think people oftentimes view astrology as a sort of a dire predictor of what's going to be happening. Oh my gosh, the sky is going to fall, the whole Chicken Little thing, and I don't think it should be viewed that way. That's not to say that you can't be prepared for hardship, but I think it also allows you to enlighten, to act at a time when you're going to get the most benefit for your bang for your buck. If you've got a good Jupiter transit, or even if you've got a good Saturn transit, it's a time.
Yeah.
It's a time to move. I don't think of Saturn as an enemy at all. I mean,
not at all.
It's there. It's the great prod. It's the great. It's your mother telling you to clean up your room on a Saturday morning. It's getting your bills paid on time. It's paying your taxes. It's doing the responsible thing. All of which keep us on a steady, even keel.
And I think, and with Saturn too, as it transits around our chart as well, I think it always provides us the opportunity to restructure and simplify that area of our life, so we get it to function more effectively. Because that's what Saturn wants: is effective, organized function.
Yeah, effective, organized function. Yes, where you have the maximum sense of potential, and you're doing the right thing at the right time. And when you do that, there's a certain sense of inherent, feel-goodness that goes with that. When you do the right thing, when you are doing the right thing, and you're paying your bills, and you're keeping your boat afloat, those are all good things. They are self-rewarding in and of themselves.
And Chris, again, astrology is a symbolic language filled with all kinds of archetypes, and you have to learn the language, and it takes years to learn this language, right? For most of us, it's taken us decades to learn this language. But it's kind of like, trying to pick up some classical Greek texts and not being able to understand them, so dismissing their information simply because you can't understand it.
Right. And that is futile. I mean, that's a foolish thought to do, because you're not going to get much out of it. If you can... So this is getting back to our topic. We don't believe in astrology. Do I believe it works? Yes, that's a different phrase. I don't believe in it. I believe, when I say believe in astrology, I believe in the fact that I think it is reflective of our lives, us as we are as individuals. And in that regard, I think it's an effective tool. I don't believe in it as a blind follower any more than I would believe in anything as a blind follower. Because
right.
A blind follower is a fool. I mean, you don't follow blindly. That's called a lemming.
And when we're talking about belief, it's some kind of suggestion there that you're going to pray to this thing and say, "Oh, please change this or change that." You can't do that. Right. Or it's like, it's about having that information and knowing then how you can best use it. But a belief system implies that there is some sort of power way greater than you that is somehow going to change your life somehow.
Right.
And though that's a different issue, it does not apply to astrology.
Right. But I think that the idea of people, being able to do the right things at the right time is incredibly valuable, because even if you have what I would consider to be, even if you have a difficult aspect, you have a difficult time, it can be a time when you are incredibly difficulty is what makes people work. It's that time that you sort of get things done. It's when you have the squares that things really begin to shake up and make sense to you, and you get stuff done.
Yep. That's right. Well, like it was said, it's we necessity is the mother of invention, and resistance is futile.
Yes, it is futile, and I think that the idea of helping, being able to look to the. I think within every difficult aspect, there is the potential for difficulty, yes, but also the potential for great redemption at the same time. It's that duality that I referred to in the past. For everything that's difficult, there's a moment in that difficulty that brings you to a new place, either through virtue of a lesson being learned, or by virtue of the hard work required to get that car out of the snowbank or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. There's a reward at the end of the difficulty, I think.
Right, correct, and also it's understanding that we don't always get what we want, but we get what we need. And by understanding what we need in the bigger picture a little bit more clearly, perhaps we can accept that we're not always going to get what we want.
Right.
And maybe what we want, a lot of times I'll have some people come to me, whether it's for astrocartography or whatever. They want to make some big changes in their life. They want to. There's like self-will here. I'm going to do this. And it's like, wait a second. You're not being supported by the universe. I mean, you can go ahead and try to do this, but it probably won't result in the ways that you imagine or hope.
Right. Right. There's always that thing, but I think that like you mentioned, in that potential, that time frame, it's always the potential. And potential is something, if you're a physicist, you probably understand it much better. But it's that kernel of energy. Potential harbors a sense of energy where an event can go some way, and you have the ability. This is where free will, I think, steps into it as well. So if you have a client and they come to you and they say, "I'm thinking about doing this," and you look at their chart and you say, "Well, you might want to wait a week or two to do it that way," you're going to get more potential as a result of telling them when to act, and that's the idea. And that's exactly how I feel.
And that's exactly how it works.
That's how it works.
So that's how it works. So yeah. So it's not like some magical belief. Though I do believe that there's a lot of magic in the universe, and we can tap into it. But I don't think it's just by whether it's not. It's like that old question, and there's a lot we can read about it. Between fate and free will. Is it one or is it the other? Well, it's both.
It is both.
It's both. It's kind of like we are born within a certain family system, a certain sex, a certain socioeconomically, educationally. We all come from different places, right? All those have an influence, have an impact in our life.
Yeah, it does. It's very powerful. And it's the idea of free will. So, being well informed about what is going on in your life, where your talents are, where your weaknesses are, your strengths and liabilities, I say, assets and liabilities. Those are the areas you want to put your most emphasis in. And then, so you're going to have a tendency towards a certain characteristic, and that's going to be seen clearly in the chart. Whether you're a writer, a singer, a stockbroker, whatever you're going to be, you're going to see that in the astrology of the individual, and how you can manipulate that and how you can use that to your own betterment is largely up to you. That's where free will comes in, and that's because by being well informed, you can make that decision.
Right. I mean, it's as an astrologer, we can, when we're looking at working with people, it's like we can pick out those inherited strengths and weaknesses, right? And what we do with those is up to us. It's our empowerment lies in choice.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It does empower our life's choices, and it enables us to. It's just like coming to that fork in the road. Do you go left or do you go right? I think that astrology would provide you the guidance on which way to go and how to mitigate that going forward. I think that's why it comes down to a decision. And I think this is sort of I mean, you wouldn't go and operate a car or any piece of machinery without knowing how it worked. You could get hurt if you didn't know how to run a chainsaw, for example. And so knowing yourself or knowing the person you're going to be marrying or living with or your friends, I think allows you to, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go out and analyze everybody and say, what's your birthday, and I'm not going to get along with you, or I am going to get along with you. I've had people whose charts...
That's nonsense.
Yeah, I know. We've seen people with charts who you say, these people should never get along, and yet they get along fine.
That's right, and relationships are part of the mystery, the grander mystery, yes, but different things that you don't think should work actually work. But that's a different story. It's part of a different story. I always tell people when they, initially contact me for a chart, they've just kind of heard about me and they just, they don't know much about astrology and they don't know what to expect. And I always say, we're going to sit down, we're going to look at your natal chart, talk about strengths, weaknesses, we're going to look at who you are, what's currently happening in your life, and through various techniques that I like to implement, we're going to look at the year ahead, and I'm going to be able to share with you what I suspect some of your opportunities are, what your choices are, and what are some of the consequences associated with your choice. Mm-hmm. And then the rest is up to you.
Yeah, and then I think that by knowing that, the person can enter into the decision-making process very well informed because they have the ability to see what the potential is there, what the outcome could be, and how they can best use it. And it's a very, very, very useful in that term. I mean, you have to make these decisions based on the right framework and approach them with a sense of there are no absolutes. I wouldn't say there's we're not going to, I don't think any astrologer is going to say, buy a lottery ticket on Tuesday and you're going to win it. That's not the sort of way I think we should be looking at astrology. I think we should be looking at astrology by saying, well, this coming week, it looks like you got good aspects for money. That could mean a bill could come your way that you were not expecting, or that you could get it, or you could get a check in the mail. But the fact that the theme is there is what's important. That's what I think is. That's how I try to approach it with the people and say, you can manifest this any way you want to. A lot of that is up to your free will, but you have to know where you're going to be at the time. So.
Yeah. Well, there are so many ways, Chris, we can apply this craft, this body of knowledge and wisdom in our mundane activities in our life. It's if we're willing to look at it, if we're willing to work with it and look at it and be willing also to do the work that's required of us.
Yes, there is work. There's work, and that's what I think a lot of people miss the point on. There is work involved, and I think
this is life.
But the more tools you have to do the work, the easier the work can be.
That's right.
And so astrology steps in as a tool in that regard, which is very, very helpful. So anyway, we've been talking today. Mike, we've run out of time. My guest today has been Alexandra Caracosta. She is an astrologer from the West Coast, and I read an article of hers in the Astrology News Service, which is one I subscribe to, about the topic. The title was, "Do You Believe in Astrology?" And that captured my attention because I've had this conversation many times with many clients and people, and I thought it'd be fun to have a chat about it and to sort of commiserate in the fact that we don't really believe in astrology. We believe that we believe that it works, and we know that it works, and we know that it works, and we're happy that it does, and we're very willing to step into that and embrace it. Alexandra's website is Wisdom Astrology. WisdomAstrology.com is her website. And I encourage you to check out her stuff. And thank you so much, Alexandra, for talking today. It was great.
Chris, thanks so much. I thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure. And another time.
Another time. Thanks so much for coming.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.